What happens to your brain when you give up on religion? In general, every researcher I spoke to for this story was quick to point out that there don't appear to be any differences in the structure of the brains of those who believe in a higher power and those who do not. Neurologically, a number of studies, however, have suggested that faith in a higher power, and, are associated with less activity in areas of the brain and more in areas associated with intuitive, empathic thought. Coaxing people, it's not clear if being more or less critical analytic is a better or worse thing, cautions a Thomas Jefferson University Hospital neuroscientist and pioneer in neurotheology, the study of the links between religious experiences and the brain. As with all things, these are just the effects of believing in a higher power in general, independent of other aspects of religious experience, like rituals and worship, says Anthony Jack of Case Western Reserve University's Brain, Mind, and Consciousness Lab. Some religious there is also probably still a lot we don't know about how faith in a higher power affects our minds and bodies, because research into the subject is young and limited. We have thousands. In general, Jack argues, if you wake up an atheist, the story would probably be that you're tuning out a very valuable part of your brain function, reducing your level of empathetic and intuitive brain activity in favor of an elevated level of analytic and naturalistic brain activity. But this is hard to know for sure, says Northwestern University neuroscientist, because it's hard to find and track people during the conversion process to actually see how their brains change, if at all. Some atheists, even if losing faith in a spiritual higher power can lead to a decrease in activity in the intuitive and empathic parts of our brains, that doesn't mean it necessarily will. Some people may, and even if you truly do give up faith in a higher power, replace it with nothing, and experience some decrease in activity in parts of your brain associated with intuitive thought and empathy, it's not as if those parts of your brain would shut down entirely. Our brains are vast, regardless of the exact effect that a lack of belief has on our neurological activity and resultant thought processes. Plenty of evidence suggests, Jack says, that having some kind of spiritual belief is associated with being more psychologically adjusted, and with being more physically healthy because of that psychological adjustment. Some benefits of religion likely come down to the organized faiths offer, regardless of the actuality, or depth, of their belief in the higher powers they center on. Some may come down, but some of the health benefits, Jack suggests, likely stem from the power of belief in a higher power on its own to give a sense of meaning to your world, and purpose to your life. Entirely natural. We know, Jack stresses, that people have spiritual awakenings to some kind of belief in a higher power, and that's generally associated with massive improvements in mental well-being, stability, and resilience. That born-again belief, even if there is evidence that believing in a higher power is good for your health overall, and can help with intuitive and empathic thought, Jack stresses that this is not a clear-cut case for belief. Nothing about the